I'm Sarah Mitchell, 32, and I used to believe hard work and loyalty meant everything. After 6 years of building my marketing firm from the ground up, I thought I'd earned my place at the table. Then I got pregnant, and my boss, the man I'd trusted, respected, and helped make millions, looked me in the eye and said, "Pregnant women can't handle this job. Maybe it's time you focused on what really matters." The words hit me like a physical blow, not just because of the blatant discrimination, but because I'd given this company everything. My nights, my weekends, my brilliant ideas that had doubled our revenue. I'd sacrificed relationships, missed family gatherings, and poured my soul into making his vision reality. And now, carrying new life, I was suddenly disposable. But as I sat in my car that day, tears streaming down my face, something shifted. The vulnerability I felt transformed into something fiercer, more determined. What my boss didn't know was that I'd been quietly building something of my own connections, client relationships, and a business plan that would change everything. The trail that was meant to break me became the catalyst for the most empowering chapter of my life. 6 years ago, I walked into Hayes Marketing Solutions with nothing but ambition and a portfolio that showcased more promise than experience. Richard Hayes, the founder and CEO, had built the company from a one-man operation into a respected mid-sized firm. He was everything I wanted to become: confident, successful, and seemingly committed to excellence. The employment contract he offered was more generous than anything I'd expected. The salary was competitive, but what really caught my attention were the promises he made during our interview. "Sarah, I see something special in you," he had said, leaning back in his leather chair. "This company needs fresh blood, new perspectives. I'm looking for someone who can grow with us, maybe even help lead us into the next phase." I believed him completely. Why wouldn't I? He spoke about work-life balance, about creating a culture where talented people could thrive, about opportunities for advancement based on merit rather than politics. It sounded like the kind of place where I could build a career, not just hold a job. Those first months were intoxicating. I threw myself into every project with the enthusiasm of someone who finally felt like they belonged somewhere. I stayed, wait without being asked, came in early to prepare for meetings, and spent weekends researching industry trends that might benefit our clients. Richard noticed, and his approval felt like validation of everything I'd worked for. "You're exactly what this company needed," he told me during my 6-month review. "I want you to know that your dedication doesn't go unnoticed." But dedication came with a price I didn't fully understand then. I missed my sister's wedding because of a client emergency that, in retrospect, could have waited. I canceled dates, skipped family dinners, and let friendships drift because the work always seemed urgent, always seemed to matter more than anything else in my life. The marketing department had been struggling before I arrived, a small team with limited vision and even less coordination. Within a year, I had restructured our entire approach, implemented new systems, and began building the foundation for what would become our most successful campaigns. Richard gave me the freedom to innovate, and I ran with it. I created comprehensive strategies that didn't just meet client expectations, but exceeded them. I developed relationships with vendors, negotiated better rates, and found ways to stretch every dollar while delivering premium results. My work wasn't just about marketing, it was about understanding businesses from the inside out, finding their unique stories, and helping them tell those stories in ways that actually drove results. Richard's praise during those early years felt genuine. He would introduce me to clients as the architect of our success, and I believed that meant something. I believed it meant I was valued, that I was building something permanent, something that would grow with me over time. The irony is almost painful now. I was building something permanent, just not for myself. Every late night, every sacrificed weekend, every brilliant idea I poured into that company was creating value that would ultimately be used against me. I was strengthening the very foundation that Richard would later try to push me from, but I didn't know that then. All I knew was that I finally felt like I belonged somewhere, like I was part of something bigger than myself. For the first time in my career, I felt like I had found my place in the world. Years 3 and 4 were when everything clicked into place. The marketing campaigns I'd been developing finally had enough data to show their true impact. And the results were staggering. Our client retention rate jumped from 60% to 91%. New client acquisition increased by 150%. Most importantly, our revenue had more than doubled in 2 years. The industry began to notice. Marketing Today featured one of my campaigns on their cover. The Regional Business Awards nominated Hayes Marketing Solutions for Most Innovative Marketing Strategy, and I found myself speaking at conferences about integrated digital marketing approaches. Richard basked in the recognition, and I felt proud to be part of building something that mattered. Sarah has revolutionized how we approach client relationships, Richard said during one of these conferences. She doesn't just execute campaigns, she creates comprehensive business strategies that drive real growth. I stood in the back of the room, watching him present work that had consumed my nights and weekends for months, and felt genuinely happy. This was what success looked like: recognition, growth, and the satisfaction of knowing I was making a difference. Our clients weren't just satisfied, they were evangelical about our work. Jennifer Martinez, CEO of a tech startup we'd helped launch, told me, "You don't just understand marketing, Sarah. You understand business. You've helped us think differently about everything we do." Comments like that made every sacrifice feel worthwhile. The numbers spoke for themselves. The quarterly reports showed consistent growth, and my campaigns were directly responsible for the majority of it. I had developed a system for tracking ROI that most firms our size didn't even attempt. And it proved beyond doubt that the strategies I was implementing were working. Richard's bonuses grew larger each year, and while my salary increased too, the disparity was becoming obvious. It was during this period that I met David. He was a software developer working on a project for one of our clients, and we struck up a conversation during a particular long strategy meeting. Unlike the men I dated before, David understood the demands of building something from scratch. He had his own startup dreams, his own vision of creating something meaningful. "You light up when you talk about your work," he told me during our third date. I've never seen someone so passionate about what they do. It was refreshing to be with someone who saw my ambition as an asset rather than a complication. David understood long hours and missed dinners because he lived them too. Our relationship developed. Alongside my career success, we supported each other through the challenges of building professional lives that mattered to us. When I had to cancel date night for a client emergency, David would bring dinner to the office. When his startup faced funding challenges, I helped him develop a pitch that eventually secured his Series A round. By year 5, I felt untouchable. The company was thriving, my relationship with David was solid, and I had finally achieved the kind of professional recognition I'd always dreamed of. Richard relied on me for everything: strategic decisions, client relationships, even hiring choices. I was his right hand, his trusted advisor, the person who made his vision reality. "I don't know what I'd do without you," he told me during my annual review. "You've become absolutely essential to everything we do here." I believed him then. I believed that essential meant secure, that value meant protection, that loyalty was a two-way street. The irony is that my success during those golden years was what made my later betrayals so devastating. I had proven myself beyond any reasonable doubt. I had data, testimonials, industry recognition, and a track record that spoke for itself. I had built not just campaigns, but systems, not just client relationships, but an entire approach to business that had transformed the company. I felt like I had earned my place at the table. I felt like I belonged. I felt like I was home. It started with a nagging feeling that I couldn't quite shake. Despite all the success, despite the recognition and the growing revenue, something felt off. I was doing the work of a partner, making decisions that affected the entire direction of the company, but I was still just an employee. My title was Senior Marketing Director, but my responsibilities extended far beyond marketing into strategic planning. Business development and client relations. The realization hit me during a particularly frustrating budget meeting. Richard was presenting our 5-year growth projection to potential investors, and every slide was built on strategies I had developed. The revenue forecasts were based on campaigns I had designed. The client retention projections relied on relationships I had built. Yet when the investors asked questions about implementation, Richard fumbled for answers that I could have given without thinking. "We'll need to discuss the specifics with our team," he said, glancing at me for help. I provided the details, as I always did, but something shifted in that moment. I realized that I wasn't just supporting Richard's vision, I was creating it. The difference between us wasn't knowledge or capability. It was ownership. That night, I went home and opened a new document on my laptop. I titled it Strategic Planning Notes and began writing down everything I knew about the marketing industry, about our clients, about the opportunities that Richard consistently missed or ignored. What started as a simple brainstorming session became something more comprehensive, a business plan. I wasn't planning to compete with Richard, at least not initially. I was simply trying to understand my own value, to articulate what I brought to the table and what I might be capable of. On my own, but the more I wrote, the more I realized that I had been thinking small. I had been so focused on making Richard's company successful that I hadn't considered what I could accomplish with my own. The plan evolved over months of late-night writing sessions. I analyzed market gaps that our current company couldn't or wouldn't address. I researched funding options for startups in the marketing space. I explored the legal requirements for establishing a competing business, carefully noting the boundaries set by my non-compete agreement. Most importantly, I began to understand the relationships I had built over the years. The clients who called me directly instead of going through Richard. The vendors who offered me opportunities they never presented to him. The industry contacts who sought my advice on their own projects. These weren't just professional relationships. They were the foundation of a potential business. David noticed the change in me before I said anything. "You're different lately," he said one evening as I closed my laptop. More focused, more excited about something. "What's going on?" I wasn't ready to share the full scope of what I was planning, but I needed to talk to someone. "I've been thinking about what comes next," I told him. "About whether I'm making the most of my opportunities where I am." David's response surprised me. "You've been thinking about this for a while, haven't you? I can see it in how you talk about work lately. You're not just talking about projects anymore, you're talking about possibilities." He was right. The business plan had become more than an intellectual exercise. It was a roadmap to independence, to building something that would be truly mine. I researched everything: market positioning, competitive analysis, financial projections, operational requirements. I contacted former colleagues who had started their own agencies, asking casual questions about their experiences. The more research I did, the more confident I became. I had the skills, the relationships, and the market knowledge to succeed. More importantly, I had identified several opportunities that our current company was missing. Richard's conservative approach and resistance to innovation had created gaps in the market that a smaller, more agile firm could fill. I began reaching out to potential clients, not to steal business, but to understand their needs better. I attended industry events that Richard skipped, building relationships with people who could become partners or clients in the future. I was careful not to violate any agreements, but I was also strategic about positioning myself for whatever came next. Irony was that this planning made me better at my current job. Understanding the market from an owner's perspective gave me insights that improved my work for Richard. I developed strategies that were more sophisticated, more nuanced, more effective than ever before. I was simultaneously his most valuable employee and his most dangerous potential competitor, but I wasn't ready to make any moves yet. The business plan was still theoretical, still a dream deferred. I had a good job, a stable income, and a boss who seemed to value my contributions. I wasn't looking for a reason to leave. I was simply preparing for the possibility that I might need to. David and I had been talking about starting a family for months, but when I saw those 2 pink lines on the pregnancy test, my heart still skipped a beat. We had been trying for nearly a year, and I had almost convinced myself that it might not happen for us. The test sat on our bathroom counter like a small miracle, concrete proof that our lives were about to change in the most beautiful way possible. "Are you sure?" David asked, wrapping his arms around me from behind as we both stared at the test. "I mean, these things can be wrong, right?" I leaned back against his chest, feeling the solid warmth of his support. "I'm sure." I've been feeling different for weeks, but I didn't want to get our hopes up. We stood there in comfortable silence, both processing the magnitude of what this meant. We were going to be parents. We were going to create a life together, build a family, add something beautiful to the world. The doctor's appointment confirmed what we already knew. And suddenly the abstract concept of someday having kids became very real. I was 8 weeks pregnant, healthy, and due in late March. David held my hand as we listened to the heartbeat for the first time, and I saw tears in his eyes that matched my own. "This is really happening," he whispered, and I nodded, overwhelmed by the perfect rightness of it all. But even in those first moments of pure joy, I felt a flutter of anxiety about work. Not because I didn't want to be a mother, I absolutely did, but because I knew the conversation with Richard would be complicated. I had seen what happened to other women in our industry when they announced pregnancies. The subtle shift in how they were perceived, the gradual exclusion from important projects, the unspoken assumption that they were no longer fully committed to their careers. I spent days crafting the perfect approach. I would emphasize my continued commitment to the company, outline my plans for managing projects during maternity leave, and make it clear that this pregnancy would not affect my performance or dedication. I prepared answers to every question I could imagine, armed myself with data about productivity during pregnancy, and planned to have the conversation at the perfect moment. Thought the opportunity came after our monthly strategy meeting. Richard was in a good mood. We had just signed a major new client, and the quarterly numbers were strong. I had contributed significantly to both wins, and I felt confident that my value to the company was indisputable. "Richard, do you have a few minutes to talk?" I asked as the conference room emptied. "I have some personal news I'd like to share." He looked up from his laptop, smiling. "Of course. Good news, I hope." I took a deep breath, trying to project confidence and professionalism. "David and I are expecting our first child. I'm about 8 weeks along, and I wanted to let you know early so we can start planning for the transition." The change in his expression was immediate and unmistakable. The smile faded, replaced by something harder, more calculating. He leaned back in his chair, and I could almost see him mentally reorganizing his perception of me. "Congratulations," he said, but his tone was flat, perfunctory. "That's certainly significant news." I had prepared for this moment, but his reaction still caught me off guard. "I want to assure you that this won't affect my work quality or commitment. I'm planning to work right up until the birth, and I've already started thinking about how to handle project transitions during maternity leave." Richard nodded slowly, but I could see that he wasn't really listening to my assurances. His mind was elsewhere, already calculating the inconvenience, already writing me off as a liability. Sarah, I appreciate you telling me early. That's professional of you. He paused, choosing his words carefully, but I have to be honest with you. This is going to change things, a lot of things. My heart began to race, but I kept my voice steady. I understand there will be adjustments, but I'm committed to making this work. I've seen other women in the industry manage successful pregnancies and careers. That's when he said it. The words that would change everything between us forever. Sarah, I need you to be realistic about this. Pregnant women can't handle this job. The demands, the stress, the travel. It's not compatible with what you're going through. Maybe it's time you focused on what really matters. The words hit me like a physical blow. Not just because of the obvious discrimination, but because they revealed something I had been refusing to see. Richard had never seen me as a permanent part of his company's future. I had been valuable to him, useful, profitable, but never essential in the way I had believed. I think you're underestimating what I can handle, I said, fighting to keep my voice level. My pregnancy doesn't change my capabilities or my commitment to our clients. Richard shook his head, and I saw something that looked almost like pity in his eyes. Sarah, you're a smart woman. You know this industry, you know the demands. You can't give 100% to both a pregnancy and a career like this. Something has to give, and I can't have it be the company. I sat there, stunned by the directness of his discrimination, the casual way he was dismissing 6 years of dedicated service. This wasn't a conversation about accommodations or adjustments. This was him telling me that my pregnancy made me expendable. I see, I said quietly, and I did see. I saw everything clearly for the first time. I made it to my car before the tears started. Sitting in the parking lot of the building where I had spent 6 years of my life, I felt like I was drowning. The pregnancy that should have been the happiest news of my life had become the reason for my professional destruction. The man I had trusted, respected, and helped build into a millionaire had just told me that carrying new life made me worthless to him. My phone buzzed with a text from David. How did it go? Is Richard excited about becoming a grandpa figure to our little one? I stared at the message, unable to respond. How do you explain that someone you trusted completely just shattered your entire world? How do you tell the person you love that? Your career, the thing you've built your identity around, just ended because of the life you created together. I was still sitting there, trying to process what had happened when my phone chimed with an email. It was from Richard, sent just 10 minutes after our conversation ended. The subject line read, Staffing adjustments and project reallocations. My hands shook as I opened it. The message was brief, professional, and devastating. Sarah, following our conversation, I've decided to make some immediate adjustments to better align our resources with current needs. Effective immediately, I'm reassigning the Morrison account to Jake, and Jennifer will be taking over the Hartwell project. I think it's best if you focus on simpler, less demanding projects during this transitional period. We need to ensure our clients receive the level of attention they deserve. Best, Richard. The email was careful, legally sanitized, but its meaning was clear. He was stripping me of my most important accounts, the projects that had defined my value to the company. Morrison was the largest client I had personally secured, worth over $300,000 annually. Hartwell was an innovative tech startup that had specifically requested to work with me. These weren't just projects, they were relationships I had built, strategies I had developed, successes that bore my fingerprints. I sat in that parking lot for an hour, reading and rereading the email. Each word was chosen carefully to avoid obvious discrimination, but the message was unmistakable. Pregnant women couldn't handle important work. I was being demoted, marginalized, pushed toward the exit with corporate precision. The drive home was a blur of tears and anger. I kept thinking about all the times I had defended Richard to friends who questioned his management style, all the times I had stayed late to fix his mistakes, all the times I had prioritized his company over my own needs. I had given him everything, and the moment I needed understanding, he had thrown me away. David was waiting in our kitchen when I walked in, and one look at my face told him everything he needed to know. "What happened?" he asked, crossing the room to pull me into his arms. I couldn't speak at first. The words stuck in my throat, too painful and too unbelievable to say out loud. Finally, I managed to whisper, "He said pregnant women can't handle the job." David's arms tightened around me, and I felt his whole body tense with anger. He said what? I showed him the email, watched his face darken as he read Richard's carefully worded dismissal of my capabilities. "This is illegal, Sarah. This is textbook pregnancy discrimination. You can't let him get away with this." "I know it's illegal," I said, wiping my eyes. "But knowing something is wrong and proving it are different things. He's too smart to leave. Obvious evidence." But even as I said it, I realized that the email might be more damaging than Richard realized. The timing was impossibly coincidental major project reassignments within minutes of my pregnancy announcement. The language about transitional periods and current needs was thin cover for obvious discrimination. David held me while I cried, and slowly the tears of betrayal began to transform into something else, something harder, more focused. Richard had made a crucial mistake. He had shown me exactly who he was, exactly how much my years of loyalty and dedication meant to him. But more importantly, he had given me the motivation I needed to stop being his employee and start being his competitor. "What are you going to do?" David asked after I had cried myself out. I looked up at him, feeling something new settling in my chest. Not just anger, but clarity. Purpose. I'm going to document everything. Every email, every conversation, every project reassignment. I'm going to build a case that's impossible to ignore. "Are you going to sue him?" I considered the question. A lawsuit would be expensive, time-consuming, and uncertain. Even if I won, it would take years and cost me more than I could afford. But there was another option, one that would be far more satisfying. "Maybe," I said. "But first, I'm going to beat him at his own game." David studied my face, and I saw recognition in his eyes. He was seeing the same thing I was feeling, that this betrayal had freed something in me that I didn't even know was trapped. Richard had tried to make me smaller, to push me out, to convince me that pregnancy made me less capable. He was about to discover just how wrong he was. The next morning, I arrived at the office early and began what I now think of as my investigation. I started by reviewing every personnel file I had access to, looking for patterns in how the company had treated pregnant employees over the years. What I found made my stomach turn. Jennifer Walsh had been a talented account manager who left to pursue other opportunities 2 months after announcing her pregnancy. The official story was that she wanted to explore freelance work, but I remembered how her client load had been gradually reduced in the weeks before her departure. Her final projects had been reassigned to less experienced team members, and her performance reviews had suddenly become more critical. Lisa Chan, a graphic designer who had been with the company for 4 years, had also left shortly after starting her family. According to her file, she had requested part-time work, but the company had determined that her position required full-time dedication. She had been offered a significant reduction in responsibilities and pay, which she had ultimately declined. The pattern was clear, but it was also cleverly disguised. There were no explicit statements about pregnancy being a liability. Instead, there were performance concerns that materialized only after announcements, project reassignments justified by client needs, and offers of reduced responsibility that were positioned as generous accommodations. I began documenting everything systematically. I created spreadsheets tracking the timeline of each woman's experience, noting the correlation between pregnancy announcements and negative performance reviews. I saved emails, copied performance evaluations, and began building a comprehensive picture of institutional discrimination. The HR files revealed something else interesting. The company had never been sued for pregnancy discrimination, but there had been 2 complaints filed with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Both had been settled quietly with confidentiality, agreements that prevented the women from discussing their experiences. Richard had learned to be careful, but he hadn't learned to be different. I also discovered that I wasn't the first person to notice the pattern. Maria Santos, the head of our accounting department, had worked at the company for 8 years and had seen the entire cycle repeat multiple times. During my research, I found an email she had sent to Richard 3 years earlier, expressing concern about the trend of losing talented women after they start families. Richard's response had been dismissive. "Maria, I appreciate your concern, but we have to prioritize the company's needs. If someone's circumstances change in a way that affects their work, we have to adjust accordingly. That's just business." I printed that email and added it to my growing file. It wasn't a smoking gun, but it was evidence of a mindset that viewed pregnancy as a business problem rather than a natural part of life. The most damaging discovery came from an unexpected source. While reviewing client files, I found a folder labeled Staffing Considerations that contained Richard's private notes about various employees. The notes about me were dated just 2 days after my pregnancy announcement. "Sarah's situation will require careful handling. She's been valuable, but pregnancy will inevitably affect her performance and availability. Need to begin transitioning her major accounts to more reliable team members. Cannot afford to have clients affected by her changing circumstances." The language was careful, but the intent was clear. Richard had decided that my pregnancy made me unreliable before I had shown any signs of decreased performance. He had made a business decision to demote me based solely on his assumptions about pregnant women. I photographed the document with my phone, my hands shaking with anger and vindication. This was exactly the kind of evidence that would be difficult to explain away in court, but more importantly, it revealed the depth of Richard's prejudice. He wasn't just discriminating against me, he was doing it systematically. With planning and forethought, the investigation took me 3 days to complete, and by the end, I had assembled a comprehensive case file. I had documented patterns of discrimination, preserved evidence of bias, and identified other women who had been pushed out of the company for the same reason I was being targeted. But the research had also revealed something else, something Richard probably didn't realize. The company was more vulnerable than it appeared. The loss of talented women over the years had created knowledge gaps and relationship problems. Several former clients had expressed dissatisfaction with the service they received after their primary contact left the company. The pattern of discrimination wasn't just morally wrong, it was bad for business. Also learned that Richard's financial situation was more precarious than I had realized. The company carried significant debt, and our recent success had masked some underlying structural problems. The loss of major clients would be devastating, and the company's dependence on a few key accounts made it vulnerable to competitive pressure. As I compiled my evidence, I realized that I had stumbled across more than just proof of discrimination. I had uncovered a roadmap for everything that was wrong with the company, everything that made it vulnerable, everything that a smarter, more ethical competitor could exploit. The business plan I had been developing as a theoretical exercise suddenly seemed less theoretical. Richard wasn't just discriminating against me, he was creating an opportunity for someone else to do what he did, but better. Lisa Rodriguez came highly recommended by 3 different sources, all of whom described her as brilliant, aggressive, and absolutely committed to fighting workplace discrimination. Her office was in downtown, and everything about it projected competence and success, from the law books that lined the walls to the awards and recognition certificates that testified to her expertise. "Tell me what happened," she said after we had exchanged pleasantries. "Don't worry about legal terminology or trying to make it sound like a case. Just tell me your story." I walked her through everything: the years of dedication, the companies, success, my pregnancy announcement, and Richard's immediate response. I showed her the email about project reassignments, the notes about staffing considerations, and the pattern of discrimination I had documented. Lisa listened without interrupting, taking notes and occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and studied me for a long moment. "Sarah, I'm going to be direct with you. You have a strong case for pregnancy discrimination. The timing of the project reassignments, the documentation of bias, the pattern of behavior with other employees, it all adds up to a clear violation of federal and state employment laws." Relief flooded through me. "So I can win?" "Probably," Lisa said. "But winning and getting justice are sometimes different things. Let me explain what you're looking at." She walked me through the process of filing a complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the timeline for investigation, and the eventual possibility of a lawsuit. The process could take years, and even a successful outcome might result in a settlement that included a confidentiality agreement. "What kind of settlement are we talking about?" I asked. "Given your salary and the strength of the evidence, probably somewhere between $150,000 and $300,000, Lisa said. "Maybe more if we can prove economic damages from lost opportunities." It was a substantial amount of money, but something about the prospect left me unsatisfied. A settlement would compensate me for Richard's discrimination, but it wouldn't change anything for the next woman who got pregnant while working for him. It wouldn't address the systemic problems that had allowed this to happen repeatedly. "What if I don't want a settlement?" I asked. "What if I want to take this to court?" Lisa's expression grew more serious. "Court cases are expensive, time-consuming, and unpredictable. Even with strong evidence, juries can be difficult to read. You could spend 2 years of your life and $100,000 in legal fees to get the same result you could achieve with a settlement, but a public trial would expose what he's doing, right? It would create a record that other women could use." "Possibly," Lisa said. "But Richard's lawyers will fight to keep as much as possible out of the public record. And even if you win, the impact on his business might be minimal. Companies survive discrimination lawsuits all the time." I sat quietly for a moment, processing what she had told me. The legal system could provide some measure of justice, but it wasn't the kind of complete accountability I was hoping for. Richard could pay a settlement, sign an agreement promising not to discriminate in the future, and continue running his business exactly as he had before. "There's another consideration," Lisa added. "You're pregnant, which means you're looking at the stress of a legal battle. While you're trying to focus on your health and your family, that's not insignificant." She was right, of course. The pregnancy that had triggered this whole situation was my priority. I needed to think about what would be best for my baby, not just what would be most satisfying for my ego. "How long do I have to decide?" I asked. "You have 180 days from the discriminatory action to file with the EEOC, Lisa said. "But I'd recommend starting the process sooner rather than later. Evidence gets stale, witnesses forget details, and companies have time to develop strategies to minimize their exposure." I left her office with a retainer agreement and a timeline for action, but I also left with a growing sense that legal action alone wouldn't be enough. A lawsuit would punish Richard for what he had done, but it wouldn't prevent him from doing it again. It wouldn't change the culture that had allowed discrimination to flourish, and it wouldn't create the kind of business that I wanted to work for. Driving home, I thought about the conversation I had overheard between Richard and a potential investor the previous month. The investor had asked about employee retention, and Richard had made a joke about the challenges of managing a workforce that includes women of childbearing age. At the time, I had dismissed it as an awkward attempt at humor. Now I understood it as a window into his actual thinking. The legal system could hold Richard accountable for his discrimination, but it couldn't force him to value women as full partners in the workplace. It couldn't make him see pregnancy as a natural part of life rather than a business inconvenience. It couldn't transform him into the kind of leader I had once believed he was, but there was another way to create change. Instead of trying to reform Richard's company, I could build a better one. Instead of fighting for a place at his table, I could create my own table and invite other talented women to join me. The business plan I had been developing suddenly seemed less like a fantasy and more like a mission. The performance review Richard scheduled for the following week was a masterpiece of corporate manipulation. He had always been skilled at managing optics, but this document was particularly sophisticated in its attempt to rewrite history. Sarah, I want to start by acknowledging all the valuable work you've done for the company. Richard began, settling into his chair with a file that seemed unusually thick. You've been a solid contributor, and I want to make sure we're setting realistic expectations going forward. The word solid hit me like a slap. 6 months ago, I had been exceptional, innovative, absolutely essential. Now I was solid, a word that suggested competence without excellence. Reliability without distinction. Richard opened the file and began reading from what was clearly a carefully prepared script. Looking at your performance over the past year, there are some areas where I think we need to focus on improvement. He proceeded to dissect campaigns that had been unqualified successes just months earlier. The Morrison account, which had exceeded revenue projections by 40%, was now characterized as meeting basic expectations with some missed opportunities for growth. The Hartwell project, which had won an industry award, was described as adequate, execution with room for strategic refinement. Each criticism was technically defensible but utterly dishonest. He wasn't lying about facts, he was recontextualizing successes as failures. Reframing innovations as missed opportunities, it was gaslighting at a corporate level, an attempt to make me question my own memory and professional judgment. I'm also concerned about your focus and energy levels lately, Richard continued, not meeting my eyes. There have been instances where your attention to detail hasn't been what we've come to expect. Can you give me specific examples? I asked, keeping my voice carefully neutral. Richard shuffled through his papers. Well, there was the Henderson proposal where you missed the deadline. I stared at him in disbelief. The Henderson proposal was submitted 2 days early. I have the email confirmation. It was submitted early, yes, but it lacked the polish we typically deliver. Jennifer had to spend considerable time revising it. This was a complete fabrication. Jennifer had made minor formatting changes, adjusting fonts and spacing, but the content and strategy were entirely mine. The client had specifically praised the proposal's creativity and thoroughness. Richard, I have the client's feedback email. They called it exactly what we were hoping for and specifically mentioned the innovative approach. He waved dismissively. Client feedback is important, of course, but we have to maintain our internal standards. Sometimes clients accept work that we know could be better. The conversation continued in this vein for an hour. Every success was minimized, every minor imperfection was magnified, and every challenge was attributed to my declining performance rather than external factors. Richard was systematically constructing an alternative reality, where my pregnancy announcement had revealed pre-existing problems rather than triggered discriminatory treatment. The most insidious part was how reasonable he made it all sound. He spoke in measured tones, referenced specific projects, and positioned every criticism as constructive feedback. Someone listening to a recording might think he was being fair, even generous, but I knew the truth behind every distorted fact. I Want to be clear that this isn't about your personal situation, Richard said near the end of the meeting. These performance concerns have been developing over time. Your announcement just made me realize that we need to address them more directly. The careful phrasing was deliberate. He was creating a paper trail that would support his narrative, that my demotion was based on performance issues that predated my pregnancy announcement. It was legally sophisticated and morally reprehensible. I understand your perspective, I said carefully. I'd like some time to review these concerns and provide my own assessment of the projects you've mentioned. Of course, Richard said, closing the file. I think it would be beneficial for you to reflect on these issues. Maybe this is an opportunity for you to reassess your priorities and think about what kind of career path makes sense for you going forward. The subtext was clear. Maybe I should think about leaving. Maybe I should recognize that my pregnancy made me unsuitable for serious work. Maybe I should voluntarily step aside and save everyone the unpleasantness of forcing me out. I left that meeting feeling disoriented and angry, but also oddly empowered. Richard's performance had been so calculated, so deliberately manipulative, that it clarified something important. This wasn't about my performance or my capabilities. This was about his determination to push me out while protecting himself from legal consequences. The review document he gave me was a carefully crafted piece of fiction, but it was also evidence. Every criticism was dated after my pregnancy announcement. Every pre-existing concern had somehow escaped mention in previous reviews. The timing was damning, and the contrast with my actual track record was impossible to ignore. That evening, I called Lisa Rodriguez and scheduled another meeting. I was ready to file the EEOC complaint, but I was also ready to do something else. Richard's gaslighting had backfired. Instead of making me doubt myself, it had convinced me that I deserved better than fighting for scraps at his table. I deserved to build my own table. And I was finally ready to do it. The morning after my devastating performance review, I arrived at the office to find Maria Santos waiting by my desk with 2 cups of coffee and a knowing look that told me she had heard about yesterday's meeting. "How are you holding up?" she asked, settling into the chair across from my desk. Maria had been with the company longer than anyone except Richard, and she had a reputation for seeing everything and saying little. "I've been better," I admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully. "I assume word travels fast around here." Maria nodded grimly. Richard scheduled a follow-up meeting with HR about performance management protocols. I've seen this movie before. "Sarah, I know how it ends." Her directness was both comforting and alarming. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've watched this company push out every talented woman who's gotten pregnant in the 8 years I've been here." Jennifer, Lisa, Amanda, Rachel, all of them followed. The same script. First the project reassignments, then the performance concerns, then the generous offer to transition to part-time work. And finally, the mutual agreement that maybe this isn't the right fit anymore. I stared at her, surprised by her candor. "Why haven't you said anything? Why haven't you tried to stop it?" Maria's expression darkened. "You think I haven't tried?" "I sent Richard that email about retention patterns 3 years ago." I phrased concerns with the board when I could. But I'm the head of accounting, not HR. And Richard is very careful about how he handles these situations. He never does anything that's obviously illegal, but you know it's wrong. Of course I know it's wrong. I have 3 daughters, Sarah. I've seen what pregnancy discrimination looks like, and I've watched it happen here over and over again. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Something in her tone suggested she wasn't just asking about legal action. "What do you think I should do?" Maria glanced around to make sure we weren't being overheard. "I think you should know that you're not the only one who's fed up with how this place operates. There are people here who respect what you've built. who value your contributions and who are tired of watching Richard destroy talent because of his outdated attitudes. Like who? Jennifer Martinez from the design team has been talking about leaving ever since she saw how you were treated. Jake Morrison, yes. The same Jake who got your accounts feels terrible about it and has been asking questions about whether he should accept the promotion. Even some of our contractors have noticed the pattern. This was unexpected. I had assumed that my colleagues were either oblivious to the discrimination or complicit in it. The idea that people were paying attention, that they cared, was both encouraging and surprising. There's something else you should know, Maria continued. Richard has been telling people that you're having performance issues, that the pregnancy just coincided with problems that were already developing. But I have access to the financial records, Sarah. I can see exactly which campaigns generated which revenue. I know what your real contribution has been. She pulled a folder from her bag and slid it across my desk. These are copies of the revenue reports for the past 3 years, broken down by account manager and campaign. Your work has generated 60% of our total revenue growth. 60%, Sarah. Richard's trying to rewrite history, but numbers don't lie. I opened the folder and scanned the documents. The data was even more compelling than I had realized. Not only had my campaigns been successful, but they had been consistently more profitable than anyone else's work. The Morrison account alone had generated more revenue than Jake's entire portfolio combined. Why are you showing me this? I asked. Because I think you deserve to know your worth. And because I think this company has made a mistake that's going to cost them everything. Maria stood up, preparing to leave. Richard thinks he can replace you with junior people and maintain the same results. He's about to learn how wrong he is. After Maria left, I spent the morning reviewing the financial data she had provided. The numbers told a story that Richard's performance review had tried to obscure. I wasn't just a solid contributor, I was the primary driver of the company's success. The accounts I had built, the relationships I had fostered, and the strategies I had developed were the foundation of everything Hayes Marketing Solutions had achieved, but the data also revealed something else, the company's vulnerability. 3 of our 5 largest clients had specifically requested to work with me. The Morrison account had a clause in their contract requiring my direct involvement in strategic planning. The Hartwell startup had built their entire brand identity around campaigns I had personally developed. If those clients learned about Richard's treatment of me, if they began to question whether the company could maintain the same level of service, if they started looking for alternatives, the financial impact would be devastating. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a glimmer of something other than anger or sadness. I felt power. Richard thought he held all the cards, but he was wrong. He had the title and the ownership stake, but I had the relationships, the expertise, and the track record that clients actually valued. The business plan I had been developing suddenly seemed less like a distant dream and more like an immediate opportunity. I had the foundation, the financial data, and apparently more allies than I had realized, but I also knew that Richard wouldn't give up easily. He had spent years building his company, and he wouldn't watch it collapse without a fight. If I was going to compete with him, I needed to be smarter, more strategic, and more prepared than he expected. The game was just beginning, and I was finally ready to play. Armed with Maria's financial data and a growing sense of purpose, I began my own investigation into Hayes Marketing Solutions' true financial position. What I discovered over the next several days was both enlightening and deeply troubling. Company's success over the past 3 years had masked some serious underlying problems. Richard's lifestyle had grown increasingly expensive. The downtown office lease had doubled when he moved to a prestigious building. His salary had increased by 40% in 2 years, and he had been taking substantial bonuses even during months when cash flow was tight. More concerning was the debt load. Richard had financed the company's expansion with a line of credit that now consumed nearly 20% of monthly revenue and interest payments. The new office, the upgraded equipment, and the increased staffing had all been funded with borrowed money, creating a financial structure that was far more fragile than it appeared. I discovered this information through a combination of legitimate access and careful observation. As senior marketing director, I had been involved in budget planning and client billing, which gave me insight into revenue streams. The expense side was harder to track, but Maria's data had provided crucial context, and my own knowledge of industry standards helped me identify red flags. The most revealing document was a cash flow projection that Richard had left open on his computer during a meeting. I had only seen it for a few minutes, but it was enough to understand that the company was operating much closer to the edge than anyone realized. A loss of major clients would create serious problems within months, but the financial investigation revealed more than just vulnerability, it revealed opportunity. The company's overhead costs were inflated by Richard's expensive tastes and poor financial management. A competitor with lower costs and better efficiency could easily underprice Hayes Marketing Solutions while maintaining higher profit margins. The client contracts also contained surprises. Several of our largest accounts had clauses that allowed them to terminate their agreements if key personnel left the company. This was standard in the industry, but Richard had agreed to these terms without fully understanding their implications. If I left and took my expertise with me, these clients would have the legal right to end their relationships with Hayes Marketing Solutions. Even more interesting was the discovery that 3 of our clients had already begun asking questions about my reduced role in their accounts. Jennifer Martinez at Morrison Industries had called twice asking why Jake was suddenly handling strategy meetings that I had always led. The CEO of Hartwell had sent an email expressing concern about maintaining continuity in our marketing approach. These weren't random inquiries, they were warning signs that clients had noticed the change and weren't happy about it. Richard's attempt to marginalize me was already having consequences, but he either didn't realize it or was choosing to ignore the feedback. I also learned that the company's insurance policies didn't adequately cover employment lawsuits. Richard had saved money by choosing minimal coverage, which meant that a significant discrimination settlement could seriously damage the company's finances. He was gambling that he could push out pregnant employees without facing legal consequences, but he had left himself exposed to exactly the kind of lawsuit I was considering. The more I learned about the company's financial position, the more I understood that Richard's discrimination wasn't just morally wrong, it was strategically stupid. He was risking his most valuable relationships and his company's financial stability to avoid accommodating a pregnant employee. His prejudice was clouding his business judgment, but my investigation also revealed something else. Hayes Marketing Solutions was exactly the kind of company that could be acquired by a competitor with better management and stronger client relationships. The revenue streams were solid, the market position was strong, and the infrastructure was adequate. The only real problem was leadership. I began to envision a different kind of solution to my problem. Instead of just fighting Richard's discrimination or starting a competing business, what if I could actually buy his company? What if I could turn the tables completely and become his boss instead of his victim? The idea seemed audacious, but the financial data suggested it might be possible. The company's debt load and cash flow problems meant that Richard might be more open to a bailout than he would admit publicly. If I could secure financing and demonstrate superior client relationships, I might be able to structure a deal that he couldn't refuse. It would be the ultimate reversal. The pregnant woman he had tried to push out becoming the owner of the company he had built. But more importantly, it would allow me to create the kind of workplace I had always wanted, one where talent was valued regardless of gender. where pregnancy was seen as a natural part of life rather than a business problem, where success was measured by results rather than outdated assumptions. The business plan I had been developing suddenly had a new focus. Instead of competing with Hayes Marketing Solutions, I would acquire it. The call from Jennifer Martinez came on a Thursday morning, just as I was reviewing the latest financial projections for my acquisition plan. Her voice was tense, professional, but I could hear the underlying frustration. "Sarah, I need to speak with you about our account management. Can we schedule a call today?" Jennifer was the CEO of Morrison Industries, our largest client, and someone I have worked with closely for 3 years. We had built their entire marketing strategy from the ground up, and the results had been spectacular, a 300% increase in qualified leads and a complete transformation of their brand perception. "Of course," I said, checking my calendar. "Is there a specific concern I can help address?" "Yes, there is. Jake Morrison, no relation, by the way, has been handling our account for the past 2 weeks. And frankly, Sarah, it's not working. He doesn't understand our business model. He's recommending strategies that we already tried and abandoned, and he keeps referring to notes instead of speaking from knowledge." I felt a mixture of validation and concern. Jake was talented but inexperienced, and Richard had thrown him into a complex account without adequate preparation. "I understand your frustration, Jennifer. Jake is still learning the specifics of your industry. That's exactly the problem. We don't have time for him to learn on our dime. We hired Hayes Marketing Solutions specifically because of your expertise, your understanding of our market, and your track record of results. If you're not going to be our primary contact, we need to discuss whether this partnership still makes sense." The conversation was everything I had hoped for and everything I had feared. Jennifer's loyalty was gratifying, but I knew that Richard would blame me for the client's dissatisfaction. He would probably accuse me of undermining Jake or failing to support the transition. "Jennifer, I appreciate your confidence in my work. Can I ask what specifically prompted this call?" Jake presented a social media strategy yesterday that we implemented and abandoned 8 months ago. When I pointed this out, he said he would check his notes and get back to me. "Sarah, this is exactly the kind of waste we hired you to avoid." I closed my eyes, imagining Richard's reaction when he learned about this conversation. "I understand completely. Let me see what I can do to improve the situation. Here's the thing, Sarah. We value our relationship with Hayes Marketing Solutions, but that relationship is really with you. If the company can't provide your level of service, we'll need to find someone who can." After Jennifer hung up, I sat quietly for several minutes, processing the implications of her call. This was exactly what I predicted would happen when Richard reassigned my accounts. The clients hadn't hired Hayes Marketing Solutions, they had hired Sarah Mitchell. The company name was just the vehicle for accessing my expertise, but Jennifer's call was just the beginning. Over the next 3 days, I received similar conversations from 2 other major clients. David Chen at Hartwell expressed concerns about continuity and strategic vision. Rebecca Torres at Summit Financial asked directly whether I was still involved in their account management. Each conversation followed the same pattern. The clients were diplomatic but firm. They had hired Hayes Marketing Solutions to work with me specifically, and they weren't satisfied with the alternatives Richard had provided. They weren't threatening to leave immediately, but they were making it clear that their patience was limited. I documented every conversation carefully, not to use against Richard, but to protect myself. I responded professionally to each concern, assured the clients that their accounts would receive appropriate attention, and avoided any statements that could be construed as undermining my colleagues, but I also began laying groundwork for what might come next. During my conversations with clients, I mentioned my pregnancy in positive terms, emphasizing my continued commitment to their success. I wanted them to understand that my reduced role wasn't my choice, and that I remained fully capable of delivering the results they expected. The most significant call came from Jennifer Martinez on Friday afternoon. "Sarah, I've been thinking about our conversation earlier this week. Morrison Industries has been very happy with the results you've delivered, and we're concerned about maintaining that level of performance going forward. I appreciate that." "Jennifer, what are you thinking?" "Well, we've been considering expanding our marketing efforts, maybe bringing on additional support. If circumstances change and you decide to explore other opportunities, we'd be very interested in discussing how we might work together." The subtext was clear. If I left Hayes Marketing Solutions and started my own company, Morrison Industries would consider becoming my client. It wasn't a firm commitment, but it was exactly the kind of opening I would need to make an acquisition viable. "That's very kind of you to say, Jennifer. Right now, I'm focused on ensuring that all our clients receive the best possible service. Of course, I just want you to know that Morrison Industries values the work you've done for us. Whatever happens next, we hope to continue that relationship." By the end of the week, I had received similar hints from 3 other clients. None of them made explicit offers, but all of them suggested that their loyalty was to me rather than to Hayes Marketing Solutions. They were positioning themselves for whatever came next, and they were making it clear that they trusted my judgment more than Richard's. The irony was perfect. Richard had reassigned my accounts to protect the company from my unreliability, but his actions were actually driving clients away. His discrimination wasn't just morally wrong, it was destroying the business, relationships that I had spent years building. I began updating my business plan to include specific client projections. Based on these conversations, if even half of the clients who had expressed interest actually followed through, my acquisition of Hayes Marketing Solutions would be not just viable but profitable from day one. Richard still didn't understand what was happening. He thought he was managing a personnel problem, but he was actually orchestrating his own downfall. By my 16th week of pregnancy, the discrimination had become so routine that I almost stopped noticing it. Almost. The daily microaggressions, being excluded from strategy meetings I had always attended, having my ideas credited to other team members, being assigned to projects that clearly didn't require my level of expertise, had become the background noise of my work life, but the pregnancy itself was thriving. David and I had learned we were having a daughter, and every doctor's appointment brought confirmation that she was healthy, growing perfectly and completely oblivious to the professional drama surrounding her existence. During ultrasounds, I would watch her tiny hands move and promise her that she would grow up in a world where pregnancy was celebrated, not punished. Richard's violations of company policy had become more blatant as time passed. The employee handbook clearly stated that pregnant employees were entitled to reasonable accommodations and that their job responsibilities should not be reduced without documented performance issues. But Richard had systematically ignored these policies, creating a paper trail that any employment lawyer would recognize as textbook discrimination. The most egregious violation came when I requested time off for a routine prenatal appointment. Richard's response was swift and revealing. "Sarah, I understand that your condition requires medical attention, but we need to discuss how these ongoing appointments will affect your ability to meet client deadlines." His use of the word condition was particularly telling. Pregnancy wasn't a medical condition to be managed. It was a natural part of life. But Richard consistently framed it as a problem that needed to be solved, an inconvenience that had to be accommodated, a liability that had to be contained. I documented every conversation, every email, every policy violation. Lisa Rodriguez had taught me to think like a lawyer, to preserve evidence not just of what was said, but of what wasn't said. Not just of actions taken, but of accommodations denied. The file I was building would be devastating in court, but more importantly, it was revealing the depth of Richard's prejudice. The most painful part wasn't the professional marginalization, it was the personal betrayal. Richard had attended my wedding, had congratulated David and me when we bought our house, had seemed genuinely pleased about our success as a couple, but my pregnancy had revealed that his support was conditional, that his respect for me was tied to my usefulness to him rather than my value as a person. My colleagues' reactions varied widely. Some, like Maria, were openly supportive and angry about my treatment. Others seemed uncomfortable with the situation, but unwilling to take sides. A few appeared to agree with Richard's approach, viewing my pregnancy as a legitimate reason to question my commitment to the company. Jake Morrison, the colleague who had inherited my major accounts, was perhaps the most conflicted. He had accepted the promotion because it was good for his career, but he understood that it was based on discrimination. During one uncomfortable conversation, he tried to apologize for the circumstances without actually acknowledging what had happened. "Sarah, I want you to know that I didn't ask for this. I know how much these accounts mean to you. It's not your fault, Jake," I told him honestly. "You didn't create this situation. But I'm benefiting from it. I know that. And I know it's not right." Jake's discomfort was genuine, but it didn't change anything. He wasn't willing to refuse the promotion or speak out against Richard's decision. He was a good person trapped in a bad situation, trying to advance his career without completely compromising his conscience. The pregnancy was also affecting my relationship with David in ways I hadn't expected. He was furious about my treatment at work, more angry than I had ever seen him. His protective instincts had intensified with the pregnancy, and watching me be discriminated against triggered something primal in him. "I can't stand watching this happen to you," he said one evening after I had described another humiliating meeting. "You're carrying our daughter, you're doing incredible work, and that bastard is treating you like you're damaged goods." "I know," I said, resting my hand on my growing belly. "But getting angry isn't going to solve anything. We need to be strategic." "Strategic about what? You're planning something, aren't you?" I had been sharing pieces of my acquisition plan with David, but I hadn't revealed the full scope of what I was considering. The idea of buying Hayes Marketing Solutions still seemed audacious, even to me. But the financial projections were solid. The client support was real, and the opportunity was growing larger every day. "I'm planning to win," I said finally. "Not just to get justice for myself, but to create something better. Something that would make our daughter proud." David studied my face, and I saw recognition in his eyes. He understood that this wasn't just about revenge or vindication, it was about transformation. The pregnancy that Richard saw as a liability was actually the source of my strength. I was fighting not just for myself, but for the future I wanted to create for our child. As my pregnancy progressed, so did my resolve. Every kick from our daughter reminded me that this wasn't just a professional battle, it was a generational one. The choices I made now affect not just my career, but her opportunities. Not just my self-respect, but her understanding of what was possible for women in business. Richard thought pregnancy made me vulnerable. He was about to discover that it made me unstoppable. The incorporation papers for Mitchell Marketing Solutions arrived on a Tuesday morning in October, making my business plan official for the first time. Holding those documents in my hands, seeing my name as the founder and CEO of my own company was both thrilling and terrifying. David and I had spent weeks working with our attorney to structure the company properly. We had chosen an LLC format that would allow for future investors while maintaining my control over strategic decisions. The business was registered in Delaware for tax advantages, but our operational headquarters would be here in the city where I had built my professional relationships. The financial planning had been the most complex part of the process. We had enough personal savings to fund the initial operations, but acquiring Hayes Marketing Solutions would require significant additional capital. Our attorney had connected us with a business broker who specialized in marketing firm acquisitions, and the preliminary numbers were encouraging. Based on the financial data you've provided, the broker had explained, Hayes Marketing Solutions is worth somewhere between $2.5 million and $3.2 million. But given their debt load and the client retention issues you've identified, I think we could structure a deal for significantly less. The key insight was that Richard's financial problems were creating an opportunity. The company's debt payments were consuming an increasing percentage of revenue, and the loss of major clients would quickly make the situation untenable. If I could accelerate that process, not through sabotage, but through legitimate competition, I might be able to acquire the company for a fraction of its apparent value. The team I was assembling was perhaps the most exciting part of the plan. Maria Santos had agreed to join as Chief Financial Officer, bringing her 8 years of experience with Hazas, marketing solutions, and her intimate knowledge of the company's financial weaknesses. Jennifer Martinez from the design team was ready to come aboard as creative director. Frustrated by Richard's micromanagement and excited about the prospect of building something new, most surprisingly, Jake Morrison had approached me about joining the new company. Despite benefiting from my demotion, he had become increasingly uncomfortable with Richard's management style and the ethical compromises he was being asked to make. "I know this is awkward," Jake had said during our confidential conversation. "I know I got your accounts because of discrimination, and I know that's wrong. But I also know that you're building something better, and I want to be part of that." Jake's decision to join us was strategically valuable. He had intimate knowledge of the accounts that Richard had reassigned to him, and his departure would leave Hayes Marketing Solutions even more vulnerable. But more importantly, it represented a generational shift in thinking about workplace equity. Jake was choosing principle over convenience, even though it meant leaving a secure position for an uncertain startup. The client development had exceeded my most optimistic projections. Jennifer Martinez at Morrison Industries had formalized her company's interest in working with my new firm. Pending the resolution of their current contract with Hayes Marketing Solutions, David Chun at Hartwell had been even more direct, stating that his company would terminate their agreement with Hayes Marketing Solutions as soon as legally possible in order to work with me directly. "Sarah, you built our entire brand identity," David had said during our private conversation. "We're not going to let some corporate politics interfere with that relationship. Whatever you're planning, count us in." By November, I had secured commitments from 4 major clients representing over $800,000 in annual revenue. These weren't guarantees clients could change their minds. Contracts could be legally complicated, and Richard might find ways to retain some of the business. But the level of support was unprecedented for a startup marketing firm. The operational planning had been equally thorough. I had identified office space that would cost 40% less than Hayes Marketing Solutions' prestigious downtown location, while providing everything we needed to serve clients effectively. The technology infrastructure could be assembled for a fraction of what Richard had spent on unnecessary upgrades. Most importantly, the employee benefits package I was designing would be genuinely family-friendly, not just legally compliant. "We're going to offer 6 months of paid parental leave," I told David as we reviewed the benefits proposal. "Full health insurance during leave, flexible work arrangements for new parents, and on-site childcare once we're large enough to support it." David smiled, understanding the symbolism. "You're not just building a business, you're building a statement." He was right. Mitchell Marketing Solutions would prove that pregnancy and parenthood were assets, not liabilities. That diverse teams delivered better results than homogeneous ones. That treating employees as whole human beings was not just morally right, but economically smart. The acquisition strategy was the most complex element of the plan. Rather than simply competing with Hayes Marketing Solutions, I would wait for Richard's financial position to deteriorate, and then make an offer to purchase the company. The existing client relationships, the established infrastructure, and the Hayes Marketing Solutions brand name had value that could be leveraged for growth. But the acquisition would also be justice. Richard would be forced to sell the company he had built to the pregnant woman he had tried to push out. He would have to hand over control to someone who embodied everything he believed was incompatible with business success. He would have to watch as I transformed his discriminatory workplace into the inclusive environment. It should have been all along. The irony would be perfect. But the real satisfaction would come from proving that his prejudices were not just morally wrong, but economically stupid. That women, including pregnant women, were not liabilities to be managed, but assets to be valued. That the future of business belonged to leaders who understood that diversity and inclusion were competitive advantages, not regulatory burdens. As I finalized the business plan, I felt a kind of clarity I had never experienced before. This wasn't just about my career or my family's financial security. It was about creating the kind of workplace where our daughter could thrive, without having to choose between professional success and personal fulfillment. Richard had tried to make me smaller. Instead, he had inspired me to become everything I was capable of being. The phone call that changed everything came on a Friday afternoon in late November. Richard's voice was strained, lacking the confidence I had grown accustomed to over 6 years of working together. "Sarah, I need to speak with you about something. Can you come to my office?" I found him sitting behind his desk, surrounded by financial documents, and looking older than I had ever seen him. The quarterly reports were spread across his desk, and even from a distance, I could see the red numbers. That told the story of a company in crisis. "I'll get straight to the point," Richard said, gesturing for me to sit down. "We're facing some significant challenges. Client satisfaction is down, revenue is declining, and our debt service is becoming problematic." I nodded sympathetically, though internally I was calculating how much of this crisis was directly attributable to his discriminatory treatment of me. "What kind of challenges are we talking about?" Richard shuffled through the papers, his discomfort obvious. Morrison Industries terminated their contract last week. Hartwell is scaling back their engagement by 60%. Summit Financial is requesting a reduction in fees that would make their account unprofitable. Each piece of news was exactly what I had expected, but hearing Richard admit the scope of the disaster was still satisfying. These were the clients who had specifically requested to work with me, who had built their relationships with Hayes Marketing Solutions around my expertise and strategic vision. "That's concerning," I said carefully. "Do we understand what's driving these decisions?" "The clients are citing various concerns about service quality and strategic direction. But Sarah, I think we both know that these problems started when you were reassigned from these accounts." It was the closest thing to an admission of mistake I was likely to get from Richard. He wasn't acknowledging that his treatment of me had been wrong, but he was recognizing that it had been expensive. "What are you thinking about next steps?" I asked that. Richard leaned back in his chair, and I saw something I had never seen before: defeat. "Honestly, I'm not sure the company can survive this kind of client loss. Our debt payments are $15,000 per month, and our overhead is fixed at about $45,000. If we lose much more revenue, we'll be insolvent within 6 months." The numbers he was sharing were worse than I had estimated. Hayes Marketing Solutions wasn't just struggling, it was dying. My departure, combined with the client exodus that had followed, had exposed the company's fundamental weaknesses. "Have you considered bringing in outside investment?" I asked. "I've talked to a few people, but investors aren't interested in a marketing firm with declining revenue and client retention problems. They see this as a management issue, not a market issue." Richard was right about that. Investors would recognize that the company's problems were self-inflicted, the result of poor leadership decisions rather than external market forces. No rational investor would put money into a business that was hemorrhaging clients due to discrimination and mismanagement. Richard, I have a question for you. If someone were interested in acquiring Hayes Marketing Solutions, what kind of conversation would that be? He looked up sharply, studying my face. Acquiring the company? Sarah, are you saying you know someone who might be interested? I'm saying I might be interested myself. The silence that followed was profound. Richard stared at me as if I had suggested something impossible, as if the pregnant woman he had been pushing out of the company couldn't possibly be offering to buy it. You're serious, he said finally, completely serious. I've been developing a business plan for several months. I have potential funding lined up, and I've been in discussions with clients about their preferences for service providers. Richard's expression shifted from surprise to something that looked like calculation. What kind of offer are you talking about? I had prepared for this moment, but I still felt my heart racing. Based on the company's current financial position and projected revenue, I'm prepared to offer $1.8 million for 100% ownership of Hayes Marketing Solutions. The number was significantly below the company's apparent value, but it reflected the reality of its current situation. With monthly debt payments of $15,000 and declining revenue, Hayes Marketing Solutions was worth whatever someone was willing to pay to assume its obligations. That's substantially below what the company is worth, Richard said, but his tone suggested he understood the weakness of his negotiating position. It's substantially above what the company will be worth if the client exodus continues, I replied. Richard, you just told me that the business could be insolvent within 6 months. I'm offering you a way out that preserves some value and protects the employees who depend on this company for their livelihoods. I could see him working through the mathematics of his situation. He could refuse my offer and try to save the company himself, but that would require reversing the client losses that his own decisions had caused. He could seek other buyers, but any serious investor would conduct due diligence that would reveal the discrimination lawsuits he was facing, or he could accept my offer and walk away with enough money to start over somewhere else, free from the legal and financial complications that were closing in around him. I would need to see your financing commitments, Richard said slowly. And I would want to understand your plans for the existing employees, of course. I can provide all of that documentation. But Richard, I should be clear about something. If you accept my offer, you would be selling to someone who intends to run this company very differently than you have. He met my eyes, and I saw acknowledgement there. He understood that this wasn't just a business transaction. It was a complete reversal of power. The pregnant woman he had tried to push out would become his replacement. The policies he had ignored would be implemented and enforced. The culture he had created would be transformed. Give me the weekend to think about it, Richard said finally. I stood up, feeling the weight of the moment. Of course. But Richard, you should know that this offer has a deadline. I'm prepared to move forward with my own company regardless of whether we reach an agreement. The difference is whether Hayes Marketing Solutions survives as part of that future. As I left his office, I felt a strange mixture of triumph and sadness. This was the moment I had been working toward for months, but it was also the end of a relationship that had once meant everything to me. Richard had been my mentor, my champion, and ultimately my betrayer. Now he was about to become my former employee. Richard called me at home on Sunday evening, 3 days after our initial conversation. His voice carried a weight I had never heard before, resignation mixed with something that might have been respect. Sarah, I've reviewed your proposal with my attorney and my accountant. I am prepared to accept your offer with one modification. My heart raced, but I kept my voice steady. What modification? I want to remain with the company as a consultant for 6 months to help with the transition. At my current salary level, it was a reasonable request from a business perspective, but emotionally, It felt like Richard was trying to maintain some control over the company he was losing. Still, his knowledge of operations and existing client relationships would be valuable. During the transition, that's acceptable, I said. But I need to be clear about the reporting structure. You would be reporting to me as the new CEO. Are you comfortable with that arrangement? The pause that followed spoke volumes. Richard was struggling with the reality of what he was agreeing to, not just selling his company, but working for the pregnant woman he had discriminated against. Yes, he said finally, I understand the structure. The next morning, I walked into Hayes Marketing Solutions with the purchase agreement in my briefcase and a confidence I had never felt before. Maria Santos was waiting by my desk, her smile telling me that she had already heard rumors about what was happening. Is it true? She asked quietly. The papers will be signed this afternoon, I confirmed. By tomorrow morning, this will be my company. Maria's expression was pure satisfaction. I've been waiting 8 years to see this place get the leadership it deserves. The news spread through the office quickly, creating a buzz of excitement and uncertainty. Some employees were thrilled by the prospect of working for someone who understood their contributions and valued their potential. Others seemed nervous about the changes that were coming. A few appeared genuinely confused about how the pregnant woman they had seen marginalized was suddenly becoming their boss. Jake Morrison approached me during lunch, his expression a mixture of relief and anticipation. Sarah, I want you to know that I'm committed to making this transition work. I know the circumstances of how I got these accounts were wrong, and I'm ready to do whatever it takes to earn my place here legitimately. Jake, what matters now is moving forward and delivering results for our clients. We're going to build something better together. Jennifer Martinez from the design team was less diplomatic. I can't wait to see Richard's face when he realizes. What just happened? She said with undisguised glee. He thought he was so smart, pushing you out, but he just created his own replacement. But the moment I had been anticipating and dreading finally came at 3 p.m. when Richard called me into his office for the signing ceremony. Our attorneys were present, along with Maria as the company's CFO and Jennifer as a witness. The conference room felt charged with tension and transformation. Richard looked across the table at me as we prepared to sign the documents that would transfer ownership of Hayes Marketing Solutions to Mitchell Marketing Solutions, which would operate the company under its existing name. Sarah, before we do this, I want to say something. I nodded, curious about what his final words as owner would be. I want you to know that I respect what you've accomplished here. Building a business plan, securing financing, and orchestrating this acquisition while dealing with everything else, that takes remarkable skill and determination. It was closer to an apology than I had expected, but it wasn't quite acknowledgement of the discrimination that had made this moment necessary. I also want you to know, Richard continued, that I underestimated you. I made assumptions about pregnancy and performance that were inappropriate. There was not a full admission of wrongdoing, but recognition that his treatment of me had been based on prejudice rather than evidence. Thank you for saying that, Richard. I hope we can move forward in a way that benefits everyone. The signing itself took less than 10 minutes. Richard signed over his ownership stake. I signed the purchase agreement, and our attorneys notarized the documents that made me the owner of the company that had tried to push me out, but the real confrontation came after the lawyers left and we were alone in the conference room. Richard sat back in his chair, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read. You planned this from the beginning, didn't you? He asked. No, I said honestly. I planned to succeed in spite of you. The acquisition opportunity only became clear when your discrimination started driving away clients. The clients who left, they were really leaving to follow you, weren't they? They were leaving because they weren't receiving the level of service they had come to expect. Your decision to reassign their accounts without adequate preparation created the problems that drove them away. Richard nodded slowly. And now they'll come back because you're in charge. They'll come back because this company will once again deliver the results they need. The ownership change is just the mechanism for making that possible. He was quiet for a long moment, processing the complete reversal of our positions. This is going to be a very different place, isn't it? Yes, it is. We're going to build a company where talent is valued regardless of gender, where pregnancy is celebrated rather than punished, where success is measured by results rather than outdated assumptions about who belongs in leadership. Richard stood up, extending his hand. Across the table. Then I guess I should welcome you to the role of CEO, Sarah. I hope you'll be more successful than I was. I shook his hand, feeling the weight of everything that had brought us to this moment. I intend to be Richard. Starting tomorrow. As he left the conference room that would soon be mine, I sat alone for a few minutes, processing what had just happened. The pregnant woman who couldn't handle the job had just bought the company. The liability had become the owner. The victim had become the victor. But more importantly, I had created the opportunity to build something better, not just for myself, but for every woman who would work here in the future. My first day as CEO of Hayes Marketing Solutions began at 7 a.m., an hour before the rest of the team arrived. I wanted time to sit in the office that had been Richard's, to process the magnitude of what had happened, and to prepare for the conversations that would define the company's future. The new employee handbook I had spent weeks developing sat on my desk, a 47-page document that would transform how the company operated. It included 6 months of paid parental leave for all employees, flexible work arrangements for parents, comprehensive anti-discrimination policies, and a reporting structure that would prevent the kind of systematic bias I had experienced. The policies were just paper. Real change would require shifting the culture, addressing the attitudes that had allowed discrimination to flourish, and proving that an inclusive workplace could deliver superior results. Maria Santos arrived early as I had expected. She knocked on my office door with 2 cups of coffee and a smile that conveyed years of suppressed satisfaction. "Good morning, CEO Mitchell," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "How does it feel to be sitting on the other side of that desk?" "Surreal," I admitted. "But also right. Like, this is what should have happened years ago. So what's the plan for today?" I had scheduled all-hands meetings with every department, individual conversations with key employees, and client calls to announce the ownership transition. But the most important item on my agenda was a conversation with Richard about his role during the transition period. First, I need to establish clear expectations with Richard. He's staying for 6 months as a consultant, but everyone needs to understand that the reporting structure has completely changed. Richard arrived at his usual time, 8:30 a.m., and the awkwardness was immediate. He hesitated outside his former office, uncertain whether to knock or simply enter. I resolved the moment by walking out to greet him. "Good morning, Richard. Thank you for being here early. I thought we should discuss your role and responsibilities before the team meetings begin." We sat in the conference room, and I outlined the consulting arrangement we had agreed to. Richard would focus on operational transitions, client relationship maintenance, and knowledge transfer. He would attend meetings when requested, but would not make independent decisions about company direction. "I understand," Richard said, though I could see him struggling with the reality of reporting to someone he had tried to push out just months earlier. "What about the existing client relationships? Some of them have worked with me for years." "We'll handle that transition carefully. The clients need to understand that you're still involved, but that I'm making the strategic decisions. Your expertise is valuable, Richard, but the authority structure needs to be absolutely clear." The first all-hands meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m., and I had spent hours preparing for what I knew would be a defining moment. Some employees were excited about the change, others were nervous, and a few seemed resentful about working for someone they had seen marginalized. "Good morning, everyone," I began, standing at the front of the conference room where I had received my devastating performance review just months earlier. "I want to start by acknowledging that this transition represents a significant change for all of us." I could see the range of expressions across the room: anticipation from Maria and Jennifer, uncertainty from some of the younger employees, and barely concealed skepticism from a few of Richard's longtime supporters. "My vision for this company is straightforward. We're going to be the best marketing firm in the region by attracting and retaining the most talented people, regardless of their gender, family status, or personal circumstances. We're going to prove that inclusive workplaces deliver superior results." Jake Morrison raised his hand. "What does that mean practically for how we do our work?" "It means that talent and results will be the only criteria for advancement. It means that starting a family will be celebrated as a life achievement, not treated as a career liability. It means that we'll support each other's success instead of competing based on outdated assumptions about who deserves opportunities." Jennifer Martinez from Design spoke up next. "What about the clients who left? Are they coming back?" "I've been in contact with Morrison Industries, Hartwell, and Summit Financial. All three have expressed interest in resuming their relationships with us under the new leadership structure. We should have confirmation within the week." The meeting continued for an hour with questions about new policies, reporting structures, and performance expectations. By the end, I could see that most of the team was genuinely excited about the changes. The skeptics were still skeptical, but they seemed willing to see how things developed. The client calls that afternoon exceeded my most optimistic expectations. Jennifer Martinez at Morrison Industries was effusive in her enthusiasm. "Sarah, we're thrilled to be working with you again. This is exactly what we hoped would happen." David Chen at Hartwell was equally positive. "We never should have lost access to your strategic thinking. We're ready to expand our engagement immediately." By the end of the week, we had not only recovered the clients who had left, but also gained 2 new accounts that had heard about the ownership change and wanted to work with a company led by someone with my track record. The most satisfying moment came during a staff meeting the following Monday. Richard was presenting a transition report when Jennifer Martinez interrupted with a question about our new parental leave policy. "Sarah, I wanted to thank you publicly for the family-friendly policies you're implementing. My husband and I have been thinking about starting a family, but I was worried about the impact on my career. Now I feel like this is a place where I can grow both professionally and personally." The contrast with Richard's approach couldn't have been clearer. Where he had seen pregnancy as a business problem, I saw it as a life achievement worthy of support and celebration. Where he had pushed talented women out, I was creating an environment where they could thrive. Richard listened to Jennifer's comments with an expression I couldn't quite read. Later, as we were reviewing client feedback, he made an observation that surprised me. "Sarah, I'm beginning to understand something I missed before. The policies you're implementing, they're not just about being nice to employees. They're about competitive advantage." "What do you mean?" "The clients aren't just coming back because they like working with you personally. They're coming back because they can see that this company is more innovative, more forward-thinking, more aligned with how modern businesses actually operate." He was right. The changes I was making weren't just about justice or fairness. They were about building a superior organization that could attract better talent, serve clients more effectively, and adapt to the evolving expectations of the business world. "Pregnancy didn't make you less capable," Richard continued. "It made you think differently about what kind of company this could become. And that different thinking is exactly what we needed." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was acknowledgement. Richard was finally understanding that his discrimination hadn't just been morally wrong, it had been strategically stupid. The pregnant woman he had tried to push out had become the leader the company actually needed. Emma Rose Mitchell was born on March 15th at 6:47 a.m., weighing 7 pounds and 2 ounces of pure perfection. As I held her for the first time, feeling her tiny fingers wrap around mine, I thought about everything that had led to this moment, the discrimination that had nearly broken me, the fight that had transformed me, and the company that would now be part of her legacy. David stood beside the hospital bed, tears streaming down his face as he watched his daughter meet the world. "She's beautiful, Sarah. She's absolutely perfect." Emma was perfect, but more than that, she was free. Free from the limitations that previous generations had accepted. Free from the assumption that motherhood and professional success were incompatible. Free to dream of a future where pregnancy would be celebrated rather than punished. The company had thrived during my maternity leave, proving that the systems and culture we had built were sustainable. Maria Santos had stepped into the interim CEO role seamlessly, while Jennifer Martinez had led a campaign that won 3 new accounts. Jake Morrison had evolved into one of our most effective account managers, his guilt about the circumstances of his promotion having transformed into genuine commitment to the company's values. Even Richard had surprised me. During the 6 months of his consulting agreement, he had become an unexpected advocate for the changes we were implementing. He had seen firsthand how the inclusive policies improved employee retention, client satisfaction, and financial performance. When his consulting period ended, he had asked to stay on as a senior strategist, accepting a role with significantly less authority but genuine respect for the company's new direction. I spent years thinking that business success required making hard choices about who belonged and who didn't. He had told me during our final transition meeting, "You've proven that the hardest choice is actually the easiest one. Treat everyone with dignity and let talent rise to its natural level." Returning to work 6 weeks after Emma's birth, I found a company that bore little resemblance to the one that had tried to push me out. The Hayes Marketing Solutions nameplate was still on the door, but everything else had changed. We had grown. From 12 employees to 18, our revenue had increased by 40%, and our client retention rate was approaching 95%. More importantly, we had become the kind of workplace that attracted talent from across the industry. Women who had left other companies due to discrimination were finding their way to us. Recent graduates were choosing us over larger firms because of our reputation for supporting work-life balance. Even established professionals were taking pay cuts to join a company where they could be their authentic selves. The most meaningful moment came during Emma's first visit to the office. I brought her in for a client meeting with Jennifer Martinez at Orson Industries, and watching Jennifer hold my daughter while we discussed quarterly projections felt like a glimpse of the future. I was trying to create, "This is what I want for my children," Jennifer said, gently rocking Emma. "I want them to grow up in a world where they never have to choose between having a family and having a career." That evening, as I fed Emma in the nursery David and I had prepared in our home office, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. The pregnancy that Richard had seen as a liability had become the catalyst for everything we had accomplished. The discrimination that was meant to diminish me had inspired me to become more than I had ever imagined possible. I thought about the business plan I had hidden in my laptop, the late nights spent researching legal strategies, the conversations with clients who had chosen to follow my vision rather than accept the status quo. Every step had been necessary, every challenge had made us stronger, every setback had revealed new opportunities. Hayes Marketing Solutions was now profitable, growing and recognized throughout the industry as an innovator in both client service and employee relations. We had proven that doing the right thing was also good business, that supporting families made companies stronger, that diversity of thought led to superior results. But the real victory wasn't measured in revenue or awards. or recognition. The real victory was Emma, sleeping peacefully in my arms, completely unaware that her existence had once been considered a professional liability. She would grow up in a world where pregnancy was normal, where motherhood was powerful, where the choice to build a family was seen as evidence of hope rather than lack of commitment. I looked down at her perfect face and made a promise that I intended to keep. You will never have to choose between your dreams and your family, sweetheart. You will never be told that carrying life makes you less capable. You will grow up knowing that you can be anything you want to be, and that includes being both a mother and a leader. David appeared in the doorway, watching us with the expression of complete contentment that had become familiar since Emma's arrival. How are my girls doing? We're perfect, I said, and I meant it. We're absolutely perfect. The company that had tried to push me out because of my pregnancy had become the company that would help ensure Emma never faced the same discrimination. The boss who had said pregnant women couldn't handle the job had been replaced by a pregnant woman who had bought the company. The vulnerability that was supposed to be my weakness had become the source of my greatest strength. As I tucked Emma into her crib and prepared for another day of running the company I had fought to create, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This wasn't just about revenge or justice or proving a point. This was about transformation of a company, of an industry, of the expectations that would shape my daughter's future. The woman who had been told she couldn't handle the job had not only handled it, she had redefined what the job could be, and that redefinition would benefit not just Emma, but every child who would grow up in the world we were building together.